You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Live Tropical Weather Bulletin for July 10th. Tropical Storm Fay has formed off the east coast of the United States today and is likely to continue to track towards the north through New England and beyond. Cristina is also still going and could become a hurricane very soon. Day 192 of the year so far. Day 40 in the Atlantic, there is Tropical Storm Fay, and another area of interest that we've marked at least at a 20% in the next 5 days towards the Azores. So Fay, a very interesting system there, the sixth one of the Atlantic hurricane season already. Cristina also there, and we've marked 30% now for that disturbance. National Hurricane Center going much higher with that percentage, interestingly. And no systems active in the Western Pacific still at this point, which is a big surprise. Not really if you've been watching recently. And in the Indian Ocean, that area of interest that we had not so long ago is pretty much gone now, so we can say goodbye to that as well. Well, this is somewhere is the Atlantic. I guess not. There's the Atlantic. Oh, the music had to end. That's such a terrible impromptu stoppage of the music. Oh dear. Alright, well there is the Atlantic Ocean right now, and you can see quite clearly that Tropical Storm Fay off the east coast of the United States. And I guess at this point, with that clumsy intro, I'll introduce the whole team on this live Tropical Weather Bulletin, where we can go through it at our own pace, rather than the usual pace that we do on the Tropical Weather Bulletin. Anyway, my name's Nathan Foy. I'm joined in this hour of discussion by Luke, Strat, Ryan, and Samuel. Good evening to you all. So, is this a surprise to you all in the last few days? Were we expecting it? I think you would say in the grand scheme of this season, to have the sixth storm form by the 10th of July wouldn't have been on anyone's radar. But for this particular system to form when we saw it in the 5-day outlook, what did we think? I'm sorry, we've not got your audio just yet. I'm talking to myself. So, there's everyone else now. I keep doing that. We look wonderful tonight. Okay, Strat, go ahead.
I was going to say, in general, the model consensus has been pretty strong on developing this somewhere along the eastern seaboard of the United States for several days. Back when this was in the Gulf, it was, at a 50% chance in the next 5 days. Once it got, kind of the old center into Georgia, we were up towards 60 and 70 before it came offshore of the Carolinas. So I wouldn't say it's surprising this particular system developed, but the fact that we're already at the sixth named storm for the season, the record pace that we've been on, despite them all being tropical storms and not generating a lot of total ACE, is still quite surprising, all things considered.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, you do not expect, so many systems to form so early on. Of course, like Strat said, they've all been very weak tropical storms for the most part, and it looks like Fay is going to continue that trend, or hopefully it does.
But the difference with this one is that it's the first time that a tropical storm is going to make landfall in the northeast United States since Force 13 existed nearly 9 years ago. So this is a new one for us as a team, even though, we've got a real drought up there, really, haven't we?
I guess, although not for much longer. As someone that's in the northeast, I'm, less than an hour out from New York City. The general impacts that we're expecting, and for anyone that's watching that's in the New York metropolitan area that you should be expecting yourself, are, considering the strength of the system and the main impacts listed by the National Hurricane Center, are pretty similar to what you experience from a nor'easter that we see in February, March, and April. So in terms of actual impacts, it's not going to be too different. But the fact that it's tropical this early in the year, heading up the coastline, is the way to end the drought, I guess you'd say.
Yeah,
Ethan's our
I
main
mean,
graphics person, and he's made a cone here. Oh goodness, it's on the edge of my screen. Hold on, let me try and get closer onto the screen. You can see the end of the track there of Fay, and there's the rest of it. So you can see how we're not configured for live streaming on tropical cyclones just yet, but we are getting there as we get into the full swing of the season. There it is. So tropical storm to move through there. And do you want to read out what the tropical storm warnings are at this point?
Yeah, let me grab those really quick. They are in the video update, which is actually a card as well if anyone ever needs to go take a look at that as well. Tropical storm warning. So there's no watches right now. It's just a warning from Cape May, New Jersey to Watch Hill, Rhode Island, and that includes all of Long Island and the Long Island Sound. So basically, any coastline areas from southern New Jersey all the way up to Rhode Island, including Long Island and coastal Connecticut. So that's a pretty significant region under tropical storm warnings right now, which does actually include New York City too.
Yeah, inland warnings isn't there elsewhere? Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean they don't stretch that far inland. The tropical storm warnings from it. You have flash flood warnings that are related to the system.
Did someone say Philadelphia earlier off air?
Philadelphia is not in tropical storm warning areas
not?
right now.
Oh,
no.
Someone said
They
that earlier.
they do have flash flood warnings though, or watches.
Right.
I'm sorry. Atlantic City, Newark, and New York City, Long Island, coastal Connecticut, and coastal southern Rhode Island. Or not even. It's actually not in. It doesn't stretch all the way to Rhode Island, but coastal Connecticut, Long Island, the coastal parts of New York State, and then coastal New Jersey are where your tropical storm warnings are right now.
Yeah, we've also got Sam here with us as well. You just made it. Made it? That's not a word. You just crafted the tropical weather outlook that we just put online with all of the other storms out there. What's going on?
Yes, and as you are saying that, I am just about to tweet that out, which is right now.
Oh, there it goes.
Force 13 account, so it should be up on the Force 13 page.
If you did miss the very beginning, then it's just really the only other thing out there is Cristina, which for me I think is about to become a hurricane out there in the Eastern Pacific. It is moving out to sea, as many of those storms do. This is the main feature tonight. Tropical Storm Fay, and it was designated a tropical storm earlier. Does anyone have a disagreement on its tropical status in this room?
No.
I don't.
No.
I don't, but if anyone does, I would like to explain to them why they are wrong. Okay.
No's across the board then in this room. If you've got any comments or questions for us, that's what we do best, answering those. Start your message with Force 13 all in text on our live stream tonight. I think David is also supposedly streaming as well. He should be arriving here at some point. But that's also on Facebook if he's doing that. But definitely send those messages in. We will answer all the questions that come in to the best of our ability, because otherwise it wouldn't be much of a stream. And there they go already. Some interesting comments already coming in that we might ignore. And what do we think about that National Hurricane Center going with the 70% for the Eastern Pacific potential area of interest that's coming off? They've gone, I think, pretty high for something that's only supposed to develop in the 3 to 5 day period.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get it, because there's, pretty significant model support, but at the same time, the actual formation on the models as of the 18Z runs really teeters on the edge of 5 days and kind of spills over into 5 to 7. So, I can kind of see where they're coming from, but at the same time, considering what the Eastern Pacific has done this year as a whole, like, the actual development could be pushed off until later on than the 5 day window.
So Ethan's track forecast that he made in the cone there is calling for a peak wind speed of 60 miles per hour. What do we think in this room?
I mean, it's a little aggressive, but I can definitely see 60 miles an hour being possible, because it still has probably about 24 hours left to intensify before it hits cooler waters, and then it probably will start to weaken a little bit right before it makes landfall in the New York area, most likely.
I'd say to give to respect to the Atlantic Basin as a whole with the sea surface temperatures, even though, as it gets, to the New Jersey latitude, as it likely parallels the coastline there within the next day or so, that, the temperatures cool off a bit, but they are still around 25 to 26 degrees Celsius from coastal New Jersey all the way up to New York City. So I wouldn't say it's completely unreasonable because, those waters are still warm enough to at least support a maintaining of some intensity. So if it really ramps itself up within the next 12 to 18 hours or so, it could potentially get to the point where it could hold that intensity at least for a little bit as it approaches landfall. But in all honesty, the difference between 45 knots and 50 knots isn't really that big in the grand scheme of things.
Well, the winds do get a bit more destructive as you get up the upper echelons of tropical storm status there.
That's true.
Yeah.
And of course, when you get above 60-mile-an-hour winds, that really brings in the hurricane force gusts.
That's also true as well.
I would say I don't know. Now for an area that does experience nor'easters, I would say Tropical Storm Fay is going to be similar in terms of winds, but the good thing about that is that it's not carrying anything else with it besides the potential for coastal flooding.
Yeah,
And
I would say a
rain.
benefit
Storm
to its,
surge.
yeah, I would say a benefit to its pretty disheveled structure right now, which is typical with weak tropical storms that kind of just form off the coast this time of year. Is that right now, as you can see on the satellite imagery on screen, the convection and rainfall associated with the system is almost completely offshore,
Yep.
which especially for parts of Delmarva Peninsula and New Jersey, so long as you don't see a quick wraparound of that convection, which could still happen, and
Yeah.
if the model consensus and the track shifts slightly to the east to better match the center formation of the storm being further east than prior initializations, rainfall along those areas will be more limited. But southern New England and parts of New York could still see up to 6 inches of rain localized, up to 8. Rainfall in
Just
general will be the main
gonna
threat.
lengthen this loop.
I see.
It's about 6 minutes old at the latest frame, but just to get a longer range on what's going on there. You'll also see some numbers on the screen there. If you're wondering what those mean, they're the reported sustained winds in knots. So the highest number there I'm seeing, I saw a 23 just there near Norfolk. And along the Outer Banks, 23 knots. That's about, 25, 26 miles per hour sustained winds there.
It's probably around 30, I think, or 28 maybe.
Is it higher than that? One's 1.15.
The Outer Banks and the general area matching the latitude of the center of the storm are going to see their worst winds right now for the most part. Delmarva and parts of the Cape are could see gusts up to 30 miles an hour, which are definitely inclement. Definitely not a fun time to be out in those. But other than that and rough surf, they're already through probably the worst of it. I'd say, you could give a good argument that good portions of the southeast saw worse impacts from the system as an invest than parts of
Really?
the coastline in Virginia and the Carolinas are seeing right now. Yeah, because they got a lot more rainfall, even if the system wasn't giving as much winds.
Yeah. And how much rainfall are we expecting? I saw models suggesting something like 4 inches. Is that still accurate?
The general consensus for the maximum areas, along the coastlines, is going to be 3 to 6 with isolated amounts that could get up to 8. So that's where the risk of flash flooding comes in when you get those torrents of rain really quick that up the totals in a pretty short time span. But in terms of rainfall compared to what you'd see from a nor'easter, which is what weather systems that this region deals with a lot during the earlier parts of the year, about the same to a little bit more than that is what you'd be expecting in total rainfall.
Yeah.
All right, a bunch of questions. First of all, how does that have circulation? Is the first question.
The recon found it. That's the answer.
I don't know whether some people are maybe thinking it's a bit of a Colin. And you know what my opinion is on that, but the circulation is a lot better on this.
Yeah.
Although on radar it looks a little flimsy, but from what we've seen on satellite-derived products and looking at the visible imagery there, I'm pretty sold. And from recon, of course.
I mean,
Yeah.
we were having a discussion about it earlier, and I think originally what we were expecting after the second recon pass, where they found, what was then at least 4 hours ago or more loose center, was that they'd make it a PTC at 5 p.m. and then probably a tropical storm at like 8 or 11. So we were caught a tiny bit off guard, but it's definitely consolidating as a system. It's going to continue to have a more profound and well-defined low-level center from here on out. So I don't think there's any doubt at this point that it's a tropical storm. And anyone in harm's way in the northeast should be preparing like they're expecting a tropical storm or a nor'easter. So make sure you're not being reckless and going outside to the beach when you're getting hit by a storm that could be bringing up to 50 to 60 mile an hour sustained winds at its worst locations, with higher waves and definitely rip currents and some local surge possible.
Yeah, I'd say simply put, just stay indoors and stay away from the shoreline.
Yeah, and it's gonna be on a Saturday. I know it's the summer and you want to get out and stuff, but it's better just stay inside for a day and watch some YouTube instead. I'd recommend that.
Yeah.
Let's see, some
Strat, isn't this also a potential for severe weather from this as well?
I think Ethan would be much more of an expert on that than I am, but there is a chance. I'm not sure exactly, but I would say, that this is actually giving an enhanced risk for severe weather. That's
It's probably
why
listening
you see.
in the background. It'll
Yeah,
come on the
that's
stream.
probably why you see that's going to be why you see a large general threat area of watches for flash flooding, because those severe thunderstorms can trigger off from a system like this as it moves inland. Causes that heavy level of rainfall really
Yep.
quick within
Rapid.
30 minutes to an hour or two. Those elevated levels can with thunderstorms cause flash flooding and other problems as well. So severe weather, definitely concerned from that. I'm not sure if the U.S. channel will be going live to cover the severe weather aspect of it as it makes landfall.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be midday Saturday about, but they might. So keep an eye out for that as well.
Well, after this
I'm also
our
part of-
Tropical Weather
sorry.
Bulletin finishes up, we will be leaving this rolling with just the imagery throughout the night tonight, and who knows what we'll be doing tomorrow. We'll just have a look at it.
Someone's asking if this okay, we got a couple questions really quick. Just to answer them all. If you have a question, start your message 413 on text. Lights up, and there's a lot. I just want to get two really quick. Someone asked if Delaware is going to get hit badly. I went over the Delmarva Peninsula briefly in the video update. That's I think it's the top card option. They could get some inclement conditions, especially the convection tries to wrap around. But they should expect in general what the Cape Hatteras has gotten most of the time. So some heavier rains possible, gusty winds, inclement weather overall. But it shouldn't be anything too significant for that particular region. And then another one as well. Do you know if Fay is the first storm to impact New England since Sandy? And I'm pretty sure, at least for southern New England, the answer to that is yes. You can make the argument.
Yeah, you can make a case for Dorian.
Yeah. I was gonna say you can make a case for Dorian and Melissa of last year, because in technicality both had tropical storm force winds hit Cape Cod. But that's not really the same as, I guess, what a lot of people are focusing on right now, which is New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. So for those regions, we haven't seen a tropical cyclone impact as a fully tropical system since Irene back in 2011. So
It's the last time that a tropical storm made landfall in either the Mid-Atlantic or the New England area in the United States. The last time was Irene of 2011, so 9 years ago.
Yeah.
Almost half my life. Wow.
More questions. Will Fay live for longer than 24 hours? My answer is yes.
Probably. Yeah.
It's probably got, from its formation time to dissipation, a nice 48 hours in total. Maybe it can clock in a little over 50. Although I will say, interestingly, with the National Hurricane Center's cone, and I think ours is quite similar, if it for some reason manages to stay tropical a couple hours longer than forecast, it could technically reach Canada as a still tropical system.
Oh.
It's unlikely, and it's not going to change the impacts overall that you should expect. But in technicality, it is a possibility. Yeah, you see the cone right there. It has it as a tropical depression right on the border, almost. So you never know. You could see some weird things happen.
Yeah.
Yep. And while we're on that subject, I do want to touch briefly on the severe weather threat there as well. Currently, the SPC is running with a marginal risk for the landfall area for day 2. We could see a slight risk upgrade for day 1, and it looks like the main severe threat is going to be tornadoes, especially given the rotation interacting with the amount of shear that we could see up in the Northeast. It really depends on because one of the things that drives tornadoes and weakens hurricanes is definitely wind shear. So you have wind shear interact with the storm's rotation. You could see a couple of supercells and multicells that could cause some brief spin ups. It's not going to be doesn't look like it's going to be too big of a tornado threat, but I would keep an eye on things regardless. Up in that landfall area as well, in addition to the other threats that Fay is expected to produce.
Let's just have a quick look at what's going on elsewhere. This is the Eastern Pacific right now. You can see the whole basin there. On the right-hand side is Tropical Storm Cristina, which is looking pretty good. I would say it is on the verge of hurricane status. I think last I saw the National Hurricane Center going with 70 miles per hour.
That's right.
Moving harmlessly out to sea. A few other little bits and pieces across the basin there, but very little going on. We had a few chances of development for those systems and nothing's come of it, as expected, but you just never know. In the Westpac, I think we do know it's dead. There's nothing going on.
The Westpac is dead. Oh my God. The
Totally.
How below is this? This has to be significantly below average for cyclone formation at this point, right? For the Western Pacific, we're only at 2 right now in mid-July, almost.
Give it another couple weeks.
I mean,
another couple weeks.
I mean, to be fair, the last couple of years at this point in time, we had at least 7 or 8 both years, I think. So
this here is the South Pacific.
Yeah.
Obviously,
compared to the most recent
out-season.
years, we're definitely behind.
We are.
Do models show nothing at least for the next 2 weeks in the Eastern Pacific too, or not the Eastern, the Western Pacific too?
Yeah,
I mean,
for quite a while.
But we're looking at a very inactive overall start.
This here is the Bay of Bengal. Might look unfamiliar. A few blow-ups over Bangladesh and India, but nothing in relation to tropical cyclones at the moment. Sea surface temperatures, that's what we've also got here. If you look closely, you do have to squint at this one. 30-degree isotherm over much of the western coast of Florida now, dipping all the way down through Cuba towards Jamaica. Temperatures in the Gulf Stream 26 degrees, extending pretty much to 40 degrees north in one or two little areas, pockets. And out in the open Atlantic, temperatures really warming up as well. Eastern Pacific looking decent too. Obviously, you'll see quite clearly the La Nina effect in the equatorial zone. And the Western Pacific, very much the same as what we've been looking at in recent tropical weather bulletins. Looking at those anomalies, these are the anomalies right now. Oranges and reds are positive anomalies, warmer than normal. The blues are the opposite, colder. You can see a little area of blue in the subtropical Atlantic and in the northern Gulf. But really, there's very little areas in the tropical zone, the areas that matter, that are below average in the Atlantic. And where this storm is right now, it's around 2 to 3 degrees above strat.
Yeah, and at least for its future path in the next 24 hours or so, if it's going to intensify more than just a few miles an hour, that's going to be one of the main factors that helps it out. 29 degrees Celsius in July, up where it is, and even when it gets closer to landfall, it's probably going to be close enough to the coast where those waters are still 25, 26, or 27, enough to mean that the main inhibitor that could weaken it, potentially if that happens before landfall, would be wind shear, not sea surface temperatures. So it has a pretty favorable environment with those warm waters, in part to the Gulf Stream, mostly, actually. I think there's another question as well that I wanted to just clear up. People are asking about the Delmarva Peninsula a little bit. People were curious when the last time a storm has made landfall there, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Sandy technically made landfall there. But that
No.
wasn't tropical when it made landfall, of
Delmarva
course. So,
Peninsula?
yeah, so
No,
that's through
no,
Delaware
Sandy,
and part of Maryland.
No.
Sandy was New Jersey, Strat.
I think Irene might have done, though.
It could have.
I don't think Irene did, but I don't know.
I think it
Yeah,
might
I'd
have
be
done.
wrong.
I'd say the last time there's substantial impacts in the region from at least a former tropical cyclone enough to really be very notable was Sandy, and then before that Irene. For this whole region, from kind of the Delmarva Peninsula up, so the Maryland part, and then Delaware, New Jersey upwards. The last time they've seen a really significant tropical cyclone impacts was Sandy. So this is even though
And before
we usually
Irene, it was probably Isabel.
yeah. So even though, the region sees, storms with this kind of intensity hit them several times a year, this is one of the first times in over half a decade that we've seen a tropical cyclone kind of come up into this region as a fully tropical system. So
I do think it's overdue, though, from what we look at in terms of climatology. There's not even really been a case of a major hurricane threat, even if it remained offshore, and we used to get plenty of those.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Although, to be fair, I was, if something like this were to happen this year, I was expecting it potentially to happen in August or, either August or closer to October, early November.
Well, this might just be the
instead of up
start
in early
here.
June. Don't get us started on that. I know we're off to a very early start on the named storms. This is the record fastest pace.
Yeah.
The earliest to a fifth named storm was 2005, and that was on July 11th. We're at our sixth named storm right now on July 9th. So the season's been very active in forming tropical cyclones. I will say, fortunately, to compare this, even though the pace of named storms is
So just a
faster
minute.
right now.
Just a minute. You're saying for one day now, or 1 or 2 days, that we are 2 storms ahead of 2005?
That is correct.
That is unbelievable.
Correctly.
Yeah.
That year
Although I will
finished with a record 28 tropical cyclones. Tropical storms,
Although I will
31
say-
tropical cyclones.
I will say to
subtropical.
be thankful though that comparisons to 2005 still aren't really warranted because at this point in 2005 the first 6 storms were I think at least 3 hurricanes and 2 majors. One of them was a Cat 5. All 6 of these have only been tropical storms.
Yeah.
If you want a comparison to
It's
the
a lot
activity,
more.
I
It's
guess.
a lot more like 2011, where every storm
Yeah.
up until Irene never got to hurricane status.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of 2017 a little bit too. Not in terms of the intensity of the storms right now, of course. Later in the season we don't know that,
Yeah.
but all the early storms in 2017 were tropical storms as well.
I'm not seeing
I
it.
will say, no, I'm not talking about an analog for potential correlation for future activity. Just the start of the season having the early storms all be only tropical storms is what I'm really talking about. I will say though, in comparisons to 2005, the ACE is so much lower right now that there's no real point to
Quite
attempt to
pathetic.
compare the two. And the regions where these storms have been forming are wholly different as well. We've seen, I think most of the storms have formed in the subtropics here. While at this point in 2005, we were seeing multiple MDR storms or Caribbean storms that plowed into the Gulf of Mexico afterwards. So, very different situations overall.
Any thoughts about
Yeah.
tornadoes? That was a question that we received.
About them.
Tornado activity from this storm.
Yeah, I'll go. I did explain this before. I did talk about this earlier, but I can talk about it again. There is currently a 2% risk, right? 2% for tornadoes right now in March. SPC has that area labeled in a marginal risk, but we definitely could see a slight risk tomorrow with a potential upgrade to 5% in tornadoes. It also depends on how much shear is in the vicinity, as you need you need a sufficient amount of shear to produce rotating storms, funnel clouds, and especially tornadoes. I don't expect to see a whole lot of intense tornado activity, really. But from what I'm looking at, tracking, it looks like the tornado threat is going to be rather low.
Yeah, I mean, it does tend to be low during storms. I mean, the chances of being in a tornado warning would be quite low, depending on
Yeah.
where you are. Obviously, the coastal
Yeah.
areas would be more at risk generally.
Yeah. Although, to be fair about the general severe weather risk, since I know there's a lot of viewers coming in and out all the time, is that, the elevated risk of severe weather caused by a tropical cyclone coming on shore, especially when it's going to be entering an environment of increased shear, even if it isn't necessarily causing tornadoes, is what could be the primary cause for a lot of the, potential flash flooding and temporary periods of really heavy rainfall where you could, potentially see a burst of a couple inches an hour in isolated areas that do cause, significant local flooding concerns. And that's going to be one of the main concerns with the system as well. Even though, there could be some wind damage, especially if it manages to get to 60 miles an hour instead of just 50. Rain is overall the biggest threat for broad regions when we're talking about tropical cyclones. So I guess when we're talking about viewers that, could span all across the eastern seaboard, that's the biggest general threat they're going to be talking about for all
Yeah.
of you. So that general severe thunderstorm activity that could happen, especially if convection from the eastern side of the system, where it's mostly displaced to right now, can wrap around sooner rather than later, is when you might be more concerned about, at least brief periods where, rainfall totals can get pushed up to those isolated areas of up to 8 inches that the National Hurricane Center is talking about in their forecast advisories.
Yeah.
Are we?
Something like that.
Oh, God.
We are back on the. I don't know what happened there. I mean,
Okay.
this isn't out of our control. Sam, do you want to
Right.
repeat all of that once again?
Yeah, I want to repeat that. So yeah, I'm gonna reinstate that. That with the outer bands, we could be seeing some discrete cell activity, although it's not going to be widespread. I would anticipate that there could be some downbursts with winds of, I would say, no more than 60 miles an hour. So, especially considering that this is a tropical storm, probably going to be a mid-range tropical storm. So I would say there will be pockets of severe wind gusts and potential for tornadoes, but that's probably the main threat. I don't really anticipate really any hail with this, but I would say this is going to be a bit more of a flood threat than a severe weather threat.
Yep. That's likely, especially along coastal areas, you would imagine, looking at what the cloud pattern is at the moment. Does anyone have the latest on the recon schedule? Because there was a question about that earlier on.
I don't have it exactly, but I would, just give the general assumption that if they aren't sending one out at some point tonight, that they will probably be sending one out, at some point tomorrow, if not early afternoon tomorrow. They won't just send one reconnaissance plane into a storm about to impact a large metro area solely to identify if it's a tropical storm, and then just never fly anything into it again, unless something extraordinary were to happen to locations where the planes are supposed to take off, which is not supposed to happen. So we'll definitely get some more data from reconnaissance airplanes rather than just having to deal with buoys and satellite imagery to get proper estimates, fortunately.
Another question. Oh, it slipped my mind now. I was just watching. Oh yes, the percentage chances of it becoming a hurricane, very low.
Yeah.
Less than 5%.
Yeah, I mean, its only chance to do that is if within the next 12 to 18 hours, if it were to rapidly consolidate, get that convection completely off just being displaced to the east and wrap around the full center, and try to develop an eye feature really quick, kind of like what Pablo did last year, but, completely different locations, completely different times of the year, and the general odds of that are incredibly fragile. So I would not, if you were a betting person, I would not put bets on this becoming a hurricane.
And a question about
Yeah.
storm surge. What are we expecting there?
The NHC in general is expecting up to 3 feet of storm surge along portions of southern New England. So, from Delmarva to New Jersey, Long Island, Connecticut, Rhode Island areas.
But no
Up to
storm
3
surge
feet.
watches and warnings, though, is there?
I wouldn't be surprised there isn't, just because 3 feet of inundation isn't really enough for
Yep.
a lot of these land areas compared to, let's say, if you're in New Orleans or really low-lying parts of eastern Florida, where parts of land masses aren't really fully connected to the mainland. we're a bit more elevated up here, so inundation would mostly occur on beaches to the point where they don't really get to much property at all. But I will say, coastal property owners should be taking the proper precautions along the eastern seaboard right now for the northeast coast to make sure that everything they're doing to make sure that their property is okay. Because if you're really on the coast and you don't have any elevation, 3 feet could still be enough to potentially cause some damage. So if that's the case, make sure you got your sandbags and other preparations ready to go.
There's live radar from a station, where is it? West of Virginia Beach and Norfolk, Virginia there. Halfway to Richmond, actually. So it's doing quite well to capture most of the storm from that distance. And you can see that again on the radar, the rainfall, most of it, 99% of it is remaining offshore. And there's some tiny little bits of showers in North Carolina that are bubbling up a little bit.
And just to clarify, because it is radar, people might sometimes freak out and say, "Oh, is this an eye forming or stuff like that?" This is just general rotation of the storm. Tropical cyclones, whether or not they're a very weak tropical depression or extremely powerful hurricane, do rotate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. So this is not an eye by any means at all. This is just the actual tropical cyclone rotating counterclockwise as they are supposed to do, as long as they're not a frontal system. Yeah. So I mean, if there's anyone trying to say this is a front and not a tropical storm, I guess there's the proof that you'd want to show them that it is actually a tropical storm. It's actually rotating, but that is not an eye. It's not a tiny eye or anything like that. This is still a 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm with a minimum pressure of about 1,005 millibars, and it is not imminently becoming a hurricane right now, unless something happens after our live coverage comes off that's completely unprecedented. And the answer to that is that won't happen.
There's a question, what can my friends in Ocean City, New Jersey expect, Strat? I'm throwing them all to Strat because only he knows the answer.
Well, I mean, you take a look at the actual convection of the storm right now. Within the next 12 to 24 hours, I'm pretty sure Ocean City's closer to southern New Jersey rather than up towards northern New Jersey. So the worst impacts for you guys will, compared to much of southern New England, which will be 30 to 48 hours from now, likely be within the next 24 hours. It really depends on how much of this convection can wrap around to be, much more symmetrical, rather than just bloated to one side of the system. Because if you can get more wraparound, then coastal New Jersey can see more significant impacts. With longer periods of heavier rain, more flash flooding potential, the potential for more potentially tropical force sustained winds for some extended periods of time if it can do that. But if you see convection just stay to the east like this, it's more likely than not that southern New Jersey, at least, will see conditions quite similar to what the Cape saw and parts of coastal Virginia and the Delmarva are seeing right now, which is some rainfall, gusty winds, rip tides, and some light storm surge, but nothing really too significant, unless the storm kind of wraps itself around a bit more than what it's looking like right now. But regardless, I'd tell your friends in that area to stay on guard and watch the development of the system, because if it does that, especially if they're asleep overnight, then they could be waking up to a pretty ugly situation early tomorrow, just a pretty rough storm.
Yeah, I would show you the current storm total precipitation, but the graphics look very weird, and I'm not going to...
Surprisingly, the NHC is saying the most rainfall spot right now, and their graphic from like 6:01 p.m. when it was created is in the Delmarva Peninsula. So I don't really know what's going on with that graphic in particular, but the model consensus is that you'll see potentially up to 6 inches of accumulative precipitation occur, along southern New England and New Jersey. I guess the weird thing about this is that, a lot of the model's initiations right now are at 18Z, so that's 2 p.m. Eastern, which is, or I think it's about 3 p.m., I'm sorry, which is before, recon found the new center fix to incorporate into new model runs that'll be coming out at 0Z. So the older model runs is the most prominent version example of this is the GFS, show a system way further to the west and moving inland into like New Jersey and Delmarva than what's actually going to happen. in reality now.
Well, there's a
You know,
little look at the rainfall, and what I can tell you on this is that only the purples there, that's 1 inch of rainfall per hour. So you're really getting not very much as you get close to the coast there, not even detectable on this particular view. So not much to look at there. But from what I've seen at least, Strat, we're talking, what, widespread 4 inches overland, up to 8, you said earlier.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, if that ends up happening. That is the general forecast. Those isolated areas could get up to 8 inches if you're just in a really unlucky area. So that's why, in particular, portions of the southern New England coastline where, you're going to see most of the convection come on shore compared to, say, Cape Hatteras right now, should be on guard and prepared because, especially if your house is in a low-lying area, even if it's just the bottom of a hill or something, if you have that much rainfall coming down in a pretty short time period, it can definitely cause some adverse conditions for your specific area. But as always, for your exact specific spot, make sure to refer to your local weather office with the National Weather Service to get all that information as well.
Yep. I think there was another question regarding severe weather impacts in the New York City area.
Yeah. I mean, that's why a lot of the flash flood watches are there because, that's where, some slight severe weather, not even necessarily including, thunder and lightning, but just really heavy downpours that can be induced, can cause, issues to pop up really quick. And as the storm comes to shore, you might see some severe thunderstorm warnings pop up for the regions as well, if and probably when such things occur. The National Hurricane Center's forecast cone right now has a landfall basically right on New York City. I won't lie, it's very hard to get an exact landfall in New York City because the main city part, other than Staten Island, is a bit disjointed to the northwest of the very western tip of Long Island. So it's very hard to get, an exact bullseye on that location, say like Irene did, for example. But for specifically New York City, it's really going to come down to how much this convection wraps around the rest of the storm. If everything stays to the east and the energy is right with their path exactly, and I would note that the National Hurricane Center track in general is actually a bit to the left of the current model consensus as a whole, is that you could see something where if it stays to the east, the convection, Connecticut, Long Island, Massachusetts, and parts of Rhode Island up into Vermont are seeing the worst impacts, while New York City could stay closer to untouched. Where if convection is more able to wrap around, which is the most likely solution at this point in time, eventually before landfall, the storm is rotating, so you could easily see convection just kind of move around to different parts of the storm. That region, including coastal New Jersey, will most likely see some adverse conditions.
And moving on to southern New England as well, a question that just came in there. That's your area.
Yep. What's the question? I didn't see it.
What's expected?
What's expected? I mean, to be honest, pretty similar to what you'd see with the nor'easter that happens up in our area in southern New England a lot during February, March, and April. Some periods of rougher sustained winds of, potentially up to 50, or if we get really unlucky, 60 miles an hour. Potentially gusts higher than that. If it really is a 60-mile-an-hour storm at landfall, then you could be worried about gusts getting close to hurricane force, which are obviously problems for, especially out in the suburbs, some of the fences and other things. And if you get flash flooding combined with that, you got to be worried about some trees getting uprooted as well. But the main overall threats are going to be similar to what we see with some of those, bomb cyclones that everyone talks about in the winter and early spring. So some flash flooding, generally heavier rains, and some inclement wind. So I'd say be on guard, have your, storm plan, hurricane plan, wherever you want to have it set up, especially if you're right on the coast, because even light storm surge, if you're in a really low-lying area, could prove to be at least somewhat of an issue. It's mostly going to be a problem for New York City, coastal New Jersey, and Long Island, not as much on the other side of the Long Island Sound for Connecticut and lots of southern New England. But just, be on guard, have your plan ready. Don't be reckless and go out to the beach thinking this is a nice time to get some sick waves or anything like that. No, I mean, look, it sounds dumb, but I'm serious because...
Oh, people do.
Exactly. Even with weak storms like this in general, those rip currents can be very life-threatening if you're deciding to be reckless and go into the water. So, make sure to be safe.
It's usually the weak ones that cause the biggest
that's true.
problems with
Like I think it was Chris of a couple
currents.
years ago. Never actually touched the United States, but it had a couple U.S. deaths, unfortunately, because of rip currents and stuff like that.
And it's
So
not really down to the storm itself, it's down to people's attitudes, isn't it?
somewhat, yeah. So it's always good to encourage people to be safe. And Lucas Marble, yeah, basically expect a nor'easter with rain instead of snow. And that kind of relates to someone's question earlier. They were asking how much snow would happen in August. Your answer is a big fat 0.
Oh my goodness.
Tell you the truth right now.
Let's bring the others in here to talk a little bit more about the season, because there's a few questions about that. First of all, is there any chance this season could have over 10 hurricanes and 5 to 6 majors?
Good chance, pretty good chance in my opinion. We could definitely see a hyperactive season with a lot of hurricanes and a lot of major hurricanes. I know that the forecasts that have recently come out have been calling for like 9 to 10 hurricanes, I think, and then like 4 to 5 majors. So we'll see. There's still a lot of time until the peak of the hurricane season. It's only mid-July.
It's hard
Ryan,
to think it's really that early.
Ryan, what would you say is the in your opinion, a good comparison for this season so far? That's another question that came in.
So far, well, if we're talking about what has happened so far, I mean, 2012, 2016 come to mind
Yep.
because of both of those years had a lot of named storms, weak named storms early in. Well, actually, both of those years had like 2 named storms form in June, and then nothing in the month of July. And we're clearly getting activity in July for this year. So,
And a lot of people, I remember a lot of people were saying last month, hey, we're getting all of this in June, nothing's going to happen in July.
That's been thrown out the window pretty quick, I'd say.
Yeah.
It's just a comment in general. If you want a lot of strong storms, you're going to need to see a lot more development happen in the MDR, the Caribbean, or even in the Gulf with really quick spin-ups. If you want to see the storm total pushed up a lot, to really reach the upper echelons and get towards the end of the alphabet, that's when the subtropics are going to come into play a lot. So it's much harder out, even with pretty warm sea surface temperatures, to get a lot of really strong storms. That become major hurricanes out at the latitude where Fay is right now. Sure, you can get something that happens like a Nicole of 2016, or you can have something up a bit closer to this latitude, like Florence even was close to this latitude, getting really strong. But typically, you're going to want to see tropical cyclones to push up those hurricane and major numbers happening much further south than in terms of land impacts. Then they'll kind of come up north or come into the Caribbean, or they start in the Caribbean and move into the Gulf instead of what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and 2005 definitely carried a double, kind of a dual threat of both like development for the number of named storms.
I'm sorry, that bottom bar is not currently active.
No.
There was a bottom bar that said there was a cyclone warning in India. That's obviously not the case anymore.
Oh no!
But as I was saying, though,
I'm sorry.
the number of named storms in 2005 and the amount of energy needed to generate some of those big storms were kind of really came into play in 2005, which was kind of the reason why we had like three consecutive hurricanes in June and July.
Yeah, and for those making comparisons to, or attempting to make comparisons to the 2005 season, that's where that kind of comes into play again, because I think the only storm that formed directly in the Caribbean, MDR, Gulf region was Cristobal, and that actually stemmed from the Eastern Pacific Ocean rather than a wave or regular disturbance coming from the east. Everything else has formed north of the Caribbean, not related to any main MDR systems. We've had weird cutoff systems come in from the west through the United States, and other regions come in to form systems. For example, right now, Edouard came in from, the western U.S., came in through the Bahamas and up and somehow managed to form out of literally nowhere. And this is another example of a cutoff coming down from the United States into the Gulf of Mexico, back through the United States and out to sea where it's just formed as well. So we're not really seeing many storms form directly from the main development region area in general to become strong systems, when in 2005 a lot of the early activity was these pretty vigorous waves coming off into very favorable conditions and forming like that. The difference this year is we've seen a lot more systems from pretty, I guess, weird circumstances just finding the exact right environment, getting a bit lucky, and forming really quickly.
Oh, Strat, there's a question there about the CDPS. You calculated that earlier?
Yeah, I think there was a slight error with it. So it's basically a borderline 2-to-1 right now. I used the initial wind radius on accident. That made it a 2 by like a fraction of a point, like less than a tenth of a point.
They're both pretty
So
low
if you
numbers
had
though on that tenth scale.
if you took that away, it'd be barely a 1, a borderline 1-2. But then if you include the up to 8 inches of rain, which they've included now rather than the prior 6 inches, then it's back up to barely a stage 2. So some significant impacts are possible from the system. But overall, it's very typical to some of the nor'easters that we get here earlier in the year. The only difference is that this is actually a tropical cyclone, and the first one of tropical nature to make a direct impact in the region in almost a decade. So there's a lot more, I guess, hype and general interest around it because of that. But, mostly you should be treating this the pretty similar ways you treat a bomb cyclone or nor'easter that we see up here earlier on in the season.
Well, I've got to say, this thing is moving. At the start of this hour, it was 47 miles east-northeast of Nags Head, North Carolina, as it said at the bottom there. That's still the start of the hour's position. Now, at the end of the hour, it's moved north quite a bit. It's 39 miles east-southeast of Virginia Beach. It's just about... Yeah, it is now closer to Virginia than it is to North Carolina, so it's moving on north. And we're talking about, 12 hours or less until it reaches the Delmarva Peninsula if it decides to make landfall there.
Yeah, but I think it's moving more northwards than, northwest.
I'm not sure, though. Some of the mesoscale models suggesting that the center is going to flap about a bit and curve back in and then back out and then up towards the north again. It could happen.
I think a lot of the mesoscale ones, though, are kind of, more based on where the older center was supposed to be rather than where the new center ended up forming just a couple hours ago. That might be one of the causes of the discrepancy. At least
they've nailed this new center pretty good.
Are the zeros out yet?
I've no idea. Only the H-O will be out, I would imagine.
Yeah, because a lot of the zeros, the mesoscale right now, I'm looking at like the NAM, for example, those are still 18Zs before Recon had designated a new center, so all the older runs were incorporating the old center that was further to the south and west. So, I think it was the NHC said they were I think they said they were to the left of the general envelope, so you could end up seeing, in general, I think they're saying a more likely landfall either a very tip of coastal New Jersey to New York City region to up to central or even eastern Long Island if it goes really far east of the general forecast. But how fast did you say it's moving right now?
Oh, I didn't actually say how fast, but I would say it's
because the NHC said it's moving
like
about 6 knots, which is like 8 miles an hour before. So it might be moving a bit faster than
it's
that.
a lot more than that in the last hour. That's just in 1 hour, though.
Yeah, it's hard to get an exact speed, they said, because, center just formed, so it's hard to initialize an exact motion.
It'll move quick.
But, yeah, look at the forecast, comes from us and the NHC. This thing's supposed to be inland in Connecticut or New York by the time we get to 36 hours from now. So it does not have a lot of time over water. If this formed further south, and had 3 days to landfall, then we could be more concerned about it potentially becoming a minor hurricane, considering the conditions up to landfall are generally favorable until the last few hours when shear is supposed to increase. But fortunately for the region, we're looking at a probably moderate tropical storm, maybe getting to the upper echelons of tropical storm status if it gets really lucky. But regardless, it's important for people to stay on guard and prepared.
All right. Just to show you there again on the radar. Cloudiness definitely increasing on the coastal part of the Delmarva Peninsula. A little 1 or 2 drops of rain over the southern part of the peninsula there. And a few clouds moving into southern New Jersey now as well.
Yep,
So,
and I know...
clouds associated with Fay will probably be with you in a couple of hours, Strat. A few hours.
Oh man, it was so sunny today. I even cooked some hot dogs on the grill. Don't get me upset about that.
Oh dear.
I will say, I'm pretty sure we're
Won't be
ending
like that
soon,
tomorrow.
so if you want some last questions answered, make sure to send them all in now. Throw them
No,
all in.
yeah,
Start them
we're
as
wrapping up
4:15
very
or
soon
after 4:15.
because we finish up with the On This Day section like normal, which we'll be doing shortly. So, yes, send in the questions. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. Do we think this storm has the possibility to stall or loop before landfall? Short-range models showing that. That's what I was talking about with the mesoscales, and we had a discussion about that just now.
Yeah, let's see. Was it? I think we could see some west to east movement. Kind of erratic because center just formed, so it's not fully as strongly defined as you'd want. But I just saw that message from Nelson.
Nelson one of our members just said, "Can you make Strat walk into the ocean?" This is the same guy that was congratulated by 3 people in the chat just a moment ago.
Considering one of the things you don't want to do when you're getting impacted by any kind of tropical cyclone, even if it's very weak, is walk into water in the ocean because of the currents and other inclement conditions that can be life-threatening. I would say that is something that Force 13 would definitely not want to make me do. If you want me to be completely honest with you, we want to, show exemplary behavior for how citizens impacted by tropical cyclones are supposed to act.
All right, thank you.
Don't say that's the...
More questions. What's our thoughts on the Chesapeake Potomac storm of 1933? I've not looked at that one for God knows how long. I'll have to tell you about that some other time.
Never heard of it.
Any chance of alpha or beta? I assume you mean this year. Well, as long as we get more storms like this forming, the chances are increasing. Do any reliable models show Gonzalo forming soon? That's that 20% that we've got near the Azores. I think it's interesting. It should be watched. Could be a TD.
I think the European is the strongest one on hinting on trying to develop that out of any of them. Although the GFS does kind of bring it down as a potential cutoff between days 3 and 5. It's going to have a pretty small window, it looks like, but considering this year, you got to keep an eye on it anyways.
Yeah. Well, this stream, this hour that we've done, live Tropical Weather Bulletin, will be archived, I believe, Strat, on our YouTube channel?
It will be archived, so long as you don't end this immediately and give me a minute to actually...
No,
it will be clipped as a highlight.
The automated feed is staying on when we finish up.
Yeah, okay, perfect. That means this will be clipped.
Very
It'll be
perfect.
uploaded to YouTube in the near future. So if you guys, missed any part of the stream at all, that you just came back now, or you thought a particular part was informative that you need, make sure to just watch the video later and share it around if there's anything that you need in particular for it. And Silver Steel, thank you so much for the kind contribution. We really endlessly appreciate that. Extremely kind of you right there.
Yeah, it certainly helps us with our coverage to be able to bring everything to you, to get the technology, the software, hardware, and to connect everyone up around the world to deliver this coverage. We certainly appreciate that very much.
And just to everyone here, because I'm certain there's some people here that haven't really watched us often before, or might be subscribed but aren't all the way in the community. If you guys want to talk more about the storm or just other tropical activity in general, feel free to join the Discord server, link in the description below.
Strat's really going now. He's really going with the advertisements. We do have a Discord server. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, we do. It's a great place. You should definitely consider joining it. A lot of fun talks going on there.
Oh, there it goes.
It'd be great to have you all join us there sometime.
Why does it always post 3 times?
Because I individually posted 3 times, Nathan.
Why do you do that?
Well, because the chat goes pretty fast, so if you only post it once, it's easier for people to miss it, and then they can't scroll it properly to get it to it again. But if there's posted 3 times in a row, then it's much easier for people to get it.
Okay, thank you. Let's get Strat off the air. We're also joined by Ryan and Samuel for this hour. Luke was with us at the beginning as well. Thanks very much for taking part in this tonight, guys.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Alright, before we finish, let's take a look at what happened on this day. July 10th, 1972, there were, look at that, 4 tropical cyclones in the Western Pacific, and 3 of them were typhoons. There's a picture of them all. We also had Tropical Depression 4 in the Atlantic off the coast of Florida. Tropical Storm Tess on the right-hand side. Typhoon Phyllis, Category 4. Typhoon Rita, Category 5. And Typhoon Susan, Category 2 on this day, 48 years ago. That's a lot of storms. Of course, as always, the next name on the Atlantic hurricane list is Gonzalo. In the Eastern Pacific, the next name is Douglas. The Central Pacific, Hone is next on list 1. Over in the Western Pacific, the next name is Sinlaku. We've been waiting quite a long time for that one. And in the North Indian Ocean, the next name on list 1 is Gati. In the Southern Hemisphere, the next name is Imogen in Australia. In the Southwest Indian Ocean, the first names will be Alicia and Bongoyo. In Fiji, in the South Pacific, Yolanda is next on the list. That's all for now. We'll be back with more pretty soon. Who knows when? Check out our new look cyclone tracker on the Force 13 website for the latest up-to-date information. You can also find us, of course, on our YouTube channel, search Force 13, and also on Facebook and Twitter, Force 13 at Force 13 on Twitter for the latest updates. You can also help the project become even better by becoming an Ultimate Fan on YouTube. To see the full list of Ultimate Fan benefits and to join, visit youtube.com/Force13/join. With a special thanks to our top supporters this month. You can also check out our growing merch store so you can show Force 13's colours wherever you go. You can also find a link to our Discord server underneath this video in the description.